Now, to our subject for tonight's discussion. Probably the biggest democratic decision the British people have had to make for a generation, with direct, immediate, and long-lasting consequences for future generations.
Now I look at Brexit, and it feels to me like it's fundamentally about subsidies and immigration. And it's not even, it makes me even more pessimistic about the Eurozone because the UK doesn't even have the basic problem of the Eurozone, which is locked in at the wrong exchange rate. And it just goes to show you how unpopular labor mobility and subsidies can be. I think if they voted to exit, I don't see how the euro survives.
There is massive labour mobility in the EU, which is one of the problems for the UK, is that although the UK is not in the euro, people from Italy and Spain and Portugal have flooded into the UK.
Yes.
So there's in a way too much, and the Eurozone's problems, which I agree with your analysis, are affecting the referendum outcome in two ways. Firstly, the flow of migration from the south of Europe. Secondly, the perception, and a correct perception, that EU leaders are not competent people who understand macroeconomics, who make the right decisions. They haven't solved the problems. Final point on this, I mean, the euro's not going to fall to pieces, in my view, even if the British leave the EU, because the political will in France and Germany, despite their differences and what they need to do to move forward, to keep the euro there is so strong. It is a question of existential national identity for the Germans and the French to keep the euro, and they'll do whatever it takes to preserve it, though probably not quickly enough to make it a happy, healthy monetary union.
I do want to kind of draw a little bit of a parallel to what's going on in the US a little bit, because I think one of the issues that I increasingly think about, and I'm just going to take it for granted that most of our audience here, you know, a luminary from the United Kingdom, I won't give his name just because it was a private conversation, was telling me that he goes to meetings throughout the United Kingdom, or in London mainly. And in these meetings, most people who share his educational background, which is very high, say, Brexit's ridiculous, how could we ever do it? And then he said, if I ever take a cab and I ask a cab driver, it's almost the exact opposite. So he was basically bringing up this point that there does seem to be a distributional question. That even though in the aggregate, most economists are saying that this would be terrible for the United Kingdom, it seems at least that the perception is, among some people, that the distributional consequences, primarily through immigration and slowing down wage growth, as you mentioned, may be uneven. That people who have less income, who are more blue-collar workers, are more affected. Is that something that you agree with, or is that a myth?
Yes, totally, and I think there's a strong parallel with the US, of course, and one slight difference. I mean, the parallel is globalization is not popular anywhere in Europe. There's perception that it works to the benefit of the rich, that it creates more inequality, and that it's bad for, and that trade and migration are bad for people at the lower end of the income scale. And that, I think, is something common to North America and much of Europe. The slight difference with Britain, perhaps, in North America, but I stand to be corrected, is that although migration is very unpopular in Britain, trade is still quite popular. The average British cab driver, at least a majority of them, probably understand that our economy depends on trade. So that's the problem the Out campaign have. That all the arrangements you can think of, the alternatives amendment, whether it's Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, Canada, or just WTO rules, and we can discuss the various options, they all lead to Britain being less integrated to the European economy than it is today, and therefore to be less trade and less investment. And I think, hopefully, because I'm for Remain, the British people kind of get that message.
I kind of think in the Brexit debate, we've got a little of the both sides saying this will be a catastrophe or this is going to be the greatest. And there's a built-up skepticism of the claims, especially by the elite,
yes,
of how great this is going to be or how bad this will be. Is just like, wait a minute, didn't you tell us it was going to increase our GDP when you sold it to us? Yeah. And so that, I think, makes it hard to make that case. In the same way, the same thing happened with NAFTA and other free trade agreements. Now when they're debating TPP, they're making claims this is going to be big positives. Usually the positives aren't that big. They're 10 years down the road. It's more about defining, are we going to be more open to the world or closed to the world? The biggest number that Charles gave you was it would cut 6% of the GDP by 2030.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 14 years away. Sum total of 6% over 14 years. Is that 0.3% a year? You know, something that as economists you'd be like, damn, 0.3% a year, that seems like a lot. If you went to somebody and said, would you be willing to give up 0.3 percentage point per year to, you know, keep your culture and keep it, they'd be like, yeah, what? That's the problem. You know, that's what I mean, that the magnitude of these things is not in reality that big. That's not the issue. It's not about that.
My biggest worry is that mobilising the younger voters, we mentioned the demographics earlier, most of the polling I've seen suggests that although the Remain people are slightly ahead in the polls, if you factor in the fact that young people don't bother to vote and they're more pro-European, Brexit could easily win. And I don't think by focusing on trade, investment and security, which is the campaign is doing, is a good enough way of mobilising young people, particularly students, to vote. The fact is the EU has a pretty creditable record of helping with the US on its side get the Iran nuclear deal done. So Iran has abandoned its nuclear program, a great triumph of diplomacy that. The EU led, the Americans came and helped and did the final effort. The sanctions on Russia because of the Ukraine crisis, which have deterred Russia from stealing more bits of Ukraine's territory. The EU is a force for good in the world, and if Britain leaves the EU, the West is weaker, and those people who don't believe in Western values of rule of law and liberty and global governance will be stronger.